Hello, today we'll be creating this infinite spiral animation in Blender 3.62 using geometry nodes. The blend file will be available through a link in the description, so grab that if you'd like, and let's get into it. To start off, just open up Blender, hit A to select all, X to delete, Shift A to add a new cube, then click and drag to create a new panel, set that to the geometry node editor, and then hit new to create a geometry nodes network, and then hit N to hide the panel on the right. The first thing that we're going to want to do is add a bunch of points, and we'll use the points node for that. And then we'll just hook that into the output. We can X to delete that input node because we won't be needing it. And then we'll use a set position node to set the position of the points. First, we're just going to set the points in a line along the y-axis, and then we're going to rotate each point around the z-axis by the golden ratio based off of its point index. So for the first step, we're going to want to use a combine XYZ node to set only the y component for the position input of this set position node, because we just want to move the points along the y-axis according to their index, and we'll pull in that index using the index attribute and just pipe that into the y component there. And the reason why you're not seeing anything is this count is set to 1, so let's set that to something a bit higher, in this case 2048, and you'll see now we have this long line of points. Next, we'll take each one of these points, and based off of its index, we'll rotate it by the golden angle, which is 137.5 degrees. So each point is going to rotate about that amount around the z-axis, and you'll see what that looks like in just a second. So we're going to use a vector rotate node, and then we're going to pipe in this combine XYZ node there, because we're going to rotate this position around the z-axis by that amount. We'll set that to the z-axis, so 0, 0, 1, it's already set that way, and we're just going to be setting this angle by its index. Set that back to 0. First, let's just pipe the index directly in there, and you'll see you get something. It's kind of cool. If I make this well, you can't really see it, but we're going to multiply this angle by 137.5. So pull in a math node, set it to multiply by 137.5. And then because this angle takes in radians, not degrees, we need to Shift D to create a new math node and then convert that to radians. And so now you can see these points and the pattern that they create. It's kind of hard to see them, so I'm going to bring their radius up. And you can see this almost like sunflower phyllotaxis style pattern coming out of the golden angle. Next, we'll create an object that we'll use as an instance to place on all of these points for rendering and for artistic purposes. So what we'll do is we'll create a new object with Shift A. It's just going to be a rounded cylinder, so just create a cylinder to start off. You can go down into this modal here that pops up when you create the cylinder, and let's bring down the vertices to something like 8, maybe 16. Because we may subdivide them and we just don't need that much geometry. So go back and click on the cylinder. You can hit // on your keyboard to just see the cylinder. I'm going to hit tab to go into edit mode. I'll hit 3 to go into face mode, and then I'll left click to select that face, and then shift left click to select that face, and do Control B to bevel. I'm going to bevel that a certain amount, but I'm actually going to use this operator down here to finish it off. So set the segments to something like 6 looks pretty good, and then I want to set the width to be, well, actually I'll just hit this clamp overlap to get as much as possible. And then you'll see that it's really just a sphere at this point because I beveled it without making it longer. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to switch to wireframe mode. I'll hit 1 to turn back to vertices. I'm going to go ahead and just delete all of these verts below the below the 0 point of the Z direction. And then I'll do Shift Alt click to select this edge loop. I'm going to hit E to extrude that, and then Z to extrude along the Z axis. Then I'll hit, this is period, and then I'll hover over 3D cursor so that when you're using your transformations, you're using this 3D cursor as the origin point, which happens to be at 0, 0, 0 right now. And I'm just doing that so I can scale along the Z-axis by 0 to make sure that this edge loop is exactly in the center of the scene. So I'll hit SZ and then hit 0, and now you'll see it's right there. Then I'll do Control I to select everything except for what I had selected, and I'll hit G and Z to move my selection along the Z-axis, and then I'll tab out of edit mode. I'll go into my modifiers and I'll turn on a mirror modifier, and I'll want to go along the Z-axis, and now we have our rounded cylinder. And then I will right click and set shade smooth, so it's set to shade smooth. And that's about it for the instance. So I can hit / again to stop looking at only that object. I'm actually going to hide that in this view and in the rendered view because we're just going to use that as an input node in our node network to instance on these points. So to bring in this newly created object into our node network, we will add a scene input of type object info. We'll select the cylinder from our list, and there you have it. We're going to use this geometry output. Then we'll need a instance on points node in order to instantiate this object as an instance on all of our points. And so you can see how if you set our points as the point input and our cylinder as the instance input. Let's name these. I'll name this rounded cylinder. I'm going to name this our what should this be called? Spiral, infinite spiral, because that's what it's going to be eventually. And if we add those points into our point input, instance input, like I said before, I'm probably repeating myself, then you see all of our instances here. But they're kind of, far away from each other, and they're closer together at the center. So what we're going to have to do is scale these instances so that they fit together at every different point. I'm also going to scale this whole object down just using S in the viewport so that we can see everything in a smaller area. But what we're going to do is scale these instances, and we'll use this scale input. So to start off, let's just bring in a math node, and we'll set that to multiply. I'm just going to set this to 1 now, and then this to something, I don't know, like 12. This is probably too big. Actually, that's pretty good. And so you'll see how at the center, the instances are too big, and out here, they are too small. And so what we'll do is we'll again use the index attribute input, and we'll scale them using that to drive their scale. So to start off with that, we'll just take this index attribute, pipe that into our multiply node, and now everything's way too big. So instead of by 2, let's do by 1. Still way too big. Let's do by 0.1. There you're getting a little bit more reasonable. But this is not going to change it in the way that we want exactly, because now the object that's the center, the instances at the center are too small, the ones at the edge are too big. So what we're going to do is we're going to add in a power node. We're going to set that to 0.5. And then we're going to tune this scale, and we can see this kind of works a little bit better. And so now we can get all these little points to just barely touch each other, or just barely not touch each other. And we can get this cool, again, a sunflower. It really looks like a sunflower because it's the golden angle, everybody. It's a really cool thing. You can read about it on Wikipedia if you want, if it's fun. Okay, moving on. And what we'll be moving on to is the animation. And so the animation is going to be based off of a very simple principle, and that's just going to be changing the position based off of augmenting the index. So changing the position of each instance by adding a certain amount to its index attribute each frame. And what that'll do is, because these are already set based off of their index, if we just add 1 to the index each frame, then this will look pretty much exactly the same, except for these ones at the center will disappear. So let's actually try this first, and I'll keep explaining how this works. So let's go ahead and shift, right click and drag to add a reroute little node point there. And then what I will do is I will shift D and then change this to an add node, and let's just add 1, and let's add 100. So if I add 100, you'll see that all these ones at the center disappear, and if I just drag this down, well, let's add an input and integer input so that we're not getting values in between these. And then if I just keep adding up, you'll see that these go in and out. But we'll want these points at the outer edge to sort of snap back to the center after they get above a certain index value, or when you add a certain amount to the index, we want them to go back to 0 instead of continuing to spread out farther and farther away from the origin. And we'll do that with a modulo node. So shift D, change that to modulo, and then we're going to modulate by the count that we set up here. So I can just copy and paste that with Control C and Control V, and then now nothing appears to be happening as I increase. If I go negative, then you'll see everything just disappear. But we're just going to be adding, so you'll see nothing happens because we don't have those intermediate values. But if I use not an integer, you'll see that it appears to be rotating, but what's really happening is, like we said before, these outer points, as they get above 2048, they start to flip back to the center, and you're just seeing the in-between stages where the rotation is between integer values, if that makes sense. So anything in between 0 and 1 will rotate it, and anything in between any two integer values will make what appears to be a rotation. And so to make that work regardless of the count we have up here, we just want these values always to be the same. So we'll add an integer input, and we'll just pipe that into both of these inputs there, and then we'll set that back to 2048, but it could be anything. And then this will just change the size of the overall object, but you'll see that it still loops the outer points to the center when they get over whatever this value is set to. In terms of animation, we're going to use this value, and we're going to set that to some multiplier of, or some, some value based off of the scene frame, and we're going to divide that by a certain amount, and then that's what will get added to this value each frame, and then we'll create a rotating spiraling animation based off of that. But we'll set it up in such a way that it will create a looping animation that will loop, in this case, every 75 frames. So if we add in a scene time node, and we take that frame output, and we put that in there, then if we press play, you'll see nothing's happening because the frame is always an integer value. So then we'll add in a math node, and we'll set it to divide. And let's just set this to, something. Let's do 100. So if you set to 100, you'll see things are kind of rotating like this. Let's set it to 75 though, and you'll see that things are rotating in a different way. And it's not what we want. But what we actually want to do is we want to loop every 75 frames. And so we'll want, at the beginning, this index is at, let's say we're dealing with the index that is 0. At frame 75, we want that to be at another integer value. It could just be 1. So let's add to the frame. I don't know how to explain this. Well, what I was saying before is not actually 100% correct, because we're not just going from 0 to 1 each frame for the instance that is that has an index of 0. It's just going to be some integer. And so what we'll do is we'll divide some integer, so we'll get an integer input, and we'll divide that by 75, and then we'll multiply that by the frame. So change this to multiply, and then whatever that is, so if we do by 1, then you'll get this rotating animation, but it doesn't look very cool. If you go to 2, get something different. 3, something different. 4, you get something kind of interesting, but it's moving pretty quick. 5, again, a little crazy. 6, all right. Let's just go all the way to the one that I found that I like, which is 18. And so what's happening here is you're getting, it's like a zoetrope effect. And these things are rotating at a certain speed that results in not just that like pure rotation, but this kind of growing out of this center origin. It just looks great, and so that's what we're going to use. But you can play around with this integer and find something different. I think another one that was kind of good was 6. It was still a bit fast. You can also play around with the number of frames that you want. But in this case, we're going to use 18 and 75 because that's what I found and that's what I like. And we almost have the basics of our animation. But I actually want this to look more like some sort of vortex or some sort of gravity sink. So I want the at least the height scale of these instances as they change size to be much more dramatic. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to change the shape of our rounded cylinder. So I'll click that and tab into edit mode, and then we already have just those top values selected, and I'm going to do GZ to move that up. I'm going to make them pretty tall, because then the difference, I'll make it a little smaller, gets that much more interesting. If I hide that one, then now you're really getting the effect that we're looking for. And you can see again, switching these values, you get to see a little bit more what they would elect. Yeah, so 11, another good value. So 11 and 18. 11 gives you an inward animation. 18 gives you an outward one of a speed that's not so crazy that it's gonna, you know, blow anybody's mind or hurt your eyes or anything like that. All right, so moving on. I believe we are now moving on to the shaders. So let's just make this look a little bit more tidy, because it's always good to have a clean set of nodes. This is actually one of my favorite parts of doing node networks, is just organizing them. I'll do more of this later, certainly. Or I'll just speed this up as I'm doing it so you don't have to listen to me ramble. But maybe I will have you listen to me ramble, but also cut it so you don't have to listen to the entire thing. So to prepare this for use in our shader, we're going to want this index attribute, but we don't get it for free, so we're going to have to add a new index. So we're going to store, or a new index attribute, we're going to store a named attribute, we're going to call that instance index. It's going to be of type integer, and we're just going to take one of these index inputs, we're going to shift D to duplicate, and just pipe that in right there. And then what we'll do is we will set our material. First we're just going to create a new material, and we're going to call that infinite spiral. And then we'll add a set material node in the geometry nodes network. Just put that down there, and then we'll set the material to infinite spiral. Then we'll switch over to the shader editor, we will bring in our attribute. It'll be called instance index. We'll actually want to draw that from an instancer type, and then we can bring that as a factor in to our base color. But let's actually, for testing purposes, let's just put that directly into the surface output of our material output. We can switch to this view, and you can see that everything is just white, because except for at the very center, you'll see this. Oh, there it is. There it is. See this black one? That's 0. So let's go back to frame 0. At frame 16, it'll come out. So you can see how these instances move over time, because that black instance is the one with an index of 0, and then all these are too big, so we're going to have to scale them or transfer them by a certain amount to get what we want. One thing we can do quickly is we can add in a math converter node, and we can set that to modulo, so that our values are only go from like 0 to 3 or something like that. I can't find modulo. Why can't I find modulo? There's modulo. I'll set that to 3. And then we'll also divide by 3, so that it's a value from 0 to 1. And you can see that we have the spirals that we want, but the movement is pretty darn crazy and fast and not that fun to look at. So we're going to have to change that. And the way that I found to make this work is I'll create an add node, and then we'll want to add the frame, and we can do that with a driver. So the way that we'll create a driver in this property here is we'll click on it, and then we'll type in hashtag and frame, and that will just set this value to whatever timeline frame we have. And then once we do that, you get this really, really cool output. And again, we have a sort of zoetrope effect, which is causing the color of these to change based off of the frame in order to create the perceptual illusion of this really slow moving colored spiral in these 3 bands outwards as you see the movement of the instances has its own zoetropic effect. So next we'll want to set the colors for each of these bands of spiral, and we'll do that with a color ramp node. So add that in there, just set that to constant, drag this down, and then create a new band. We'll set the color, set that to white, we'll set this one to gray, and you'll see we have these 3 bands of color corresponding to the modulo of the index with the frame added. And we can just set these to whatever colors we want, and that'll be up to your artistic sensibilities. But first I'm going to add this principled BSDF in there, and we will switch to the Cycles rendering engine, and we'll start to take a look there. I'm going to switch to GPU. We'll add in a sunlight. We'll give it some sort of angle, maybe something like that. We'll also set the angle to be something larger. Why not just something like 32? And the strength, something, I don't know, let's go 16. Just added some nice light there. I'm also going to add in a camera object, and then I'll align active camera to view. Then I'll press N to bring up this menu, and then view camera to view. So I'll lock the camera to view so that when I move around, the camera is locked to that. I'm also going to set in the rendering settings. Let's go 1024 by 1024, and we want this square render. We're just going to set that up like right there, maybe a little lower, get everything a bit closer. Control and then mouse middle click to zoom in and out like this. Wow, we could really go far out there. I like it here, maybe here. Another thing that we could do is we could play around with the focal length. It's pretty rad. So if you set that smaller, you'll see more Move that down and up. I don't know, guys. What do we want to do? That looks good for now. So I'm gonna turn off that camera lock. I'm gonna go back to the rendering settings. I'm actually gonna set this render region on so we just see that. I already want to change it, so I'll turn the camera lock back on. I'll just move this up. I do kind of want to see into the vortex a little bit. And I'll make sure that it's right at the center with that X. The X is gone. Well, I can also turn on the composition guides. Turn on the center. You can kind of see that in the center there. So, yeah. That's looking pretty good. I'll turn off the lock again. And then I'm also going to turn the show overlays off. I can do that with Shift-Alt-Z. That's a shortcut I've been using that I really, really like. And then let's mess with the colors. So let's set, what do we want to set these to? I'll keep black, because black is, it's a fun color. It's not really a color, but you know, it's a fun shade. Red, black and red, it's a vibe. Black and yellow. Black and yellow. I like black and yellow. Got a bumblebee vibe. Black and yellow and white's pretty cool. Black and yellow and red. Ooh, black and yellow and purple. Also a vibe. Maybe just orange. Slightly different shade of... Yeah, let's stay like bumblebee aesthetic. There's some orange in honey, right? When you get to the darker shades. Let's also set subsurface to 1. Let's also pipe in the color ramp output into the subsurface color. We really don't need the space color anymore if we're going to do that. I usually set this to random walk fixed radius and make sure that the subsurface radius is uniform. 1 works for us. If we zoom in, we can kind of see what that's going to look like. What about 0.1? 0.1 is also probably fine, but let's set it to 1. I do like that. I'm going to turn on denoising in the viewport, and I'll set that to optics and none. And then let's set the specular lower, and the roughness can come down. That's starting to look pretty good. The roughness can be way down. Let's set it to 0.05. Yes. Yes. This is what we're looking for. Yeah, I mean, I like that. We could go with that. I might mess with it a little more at some point, but I'm gonna go with this for now. I'm also gonna want to add a couple more camera settings in, namely depth of field. So we're just gonna turn that on. I'll add, well, the infinite spiral is at 0, 0, 0, and the center of the spiral is at 0, 0, 0, so we can just use the infinite spiral as the focus object. And then let's bring the f-stop really, really far down. Let's set it to 0.005. Oop, that's too small. Oh, okay, really, this does, oh, 0.01. I was at 0.1, okay. 0.1 is what we started at, so 0.05 maybe. It might be a bit much. How about 0.1? Okay. Yeah, I think that's good. That way we don't need to subdivide this instance mesh anymore, because you're really not going to see the geometry of it. Yeah, I think that looks good. Okay, you know what? I think that just about covers it. I'm happy with this output. You've got this looping animation that goes from just 0 to 75 frames. So it's not even going to take that long to render. Create infinite loops. You can mess a lot with the modulo and divide values in the material. And you can do some fun stuff. Like, let me just set this to the preview. Let's set this to something, like, just bring this up and change it until you find something that's not moving, like, so incredibly quick. and you can find some cool values. And you can change the modulo to something like 6 or even higher. I mean, you can just mess with this, and if you don't, like, it's not really looping, right? Actually, it's looping pretty darn good. Wow. Yeah, it's I'm getting really lucky that it's looping so well here, but oftentimes it won't. Like, if I just set this to something random, you'll see that doesn't really make any sense. It's moving so fast that you can't even really tell, but if you find something that's not so fast that it's going to need some sort of disclaimer, then you'll see at 75 how it kind of jumps at the end of this animation. Like, when it hits that, you're going to see a little glitch. So you can play with that, and if you think through it, there are ways that you can make it loop seamlessly, but getting that looping of the colors to match up with the looping of the geometry can be a bit of a trick. Maybe there's some math behind it that I haven't yet understood or delved into. If you know what that is, please let me know in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you learned something. And above all, I hope you had fun. Until next time,